Listen.
I've been hearing a lot lately about men don't talk, but in my experience, men do talk, just people aren't listening. So it's going to be me and a group of blokes discussing our struggles and victories through life. Warning, there may be some bad language, so apologies to all the moms, especially my own. Let's get going.
Listen.
I've been, just the Black Country Blokes chewing the fat about everything that is mental health, disability, and life in general. With me, Kev Dillon, and my partner in crime, Lee Cameron. That's it. Just laughing about names. And we're joined with Lloyd Baron. Got it, smashed it. I got your name wrong. Dr. Lloyd Baron. And Lloyd, what is your actual job role?
So, as I was saying to you before, I am a jack of all trades, master of none, I'm afraid. So I am a GP. I work in Kingswinford at Kingswinford Medical Practice. I also work as a doctor in the drug services at Atlantic House. And I'm also the clinical lead for health inequalities at Dudley Integrated Healthcare NHS Trust.
So we're going to be talking about all this and more. But as we start the show, as always, we're going to talk about gratitude list. Now, my gratitude list, I am grateful for. What am I grateful for? I'm grateful for having a Mother's Day. My mum was on holiday. She's come back now, so I'm going to make a fuss of her tomorrow when I see her. But I was grateful for having a Sunday dinner with my wife, my mother-in-law, and my daughter, and spending a day at home. It was good, just being a family. And that I'm always grateful for, having people in my life that I love and that love me. So I'm grateful for that. What are you grateful for, bro?
I'm going with one, seeing as we've got a doctor on the show, health today. So my little one was off most of last week ill, but she's better this week. And she's back at school. And I'm grateful for her health, our health, her family's health, your health, everyone's health. You don't realise until someone's sick in your family how it affects you, and I don't mean jobs and things like that. I mean mentally and physically. Watching someone be ill and have seizures is not nice. So I'm grateful that she's now well. And
Doc, what are you grateful for?
Well, I think, obviously you stole mine on health. I've got to say that as a doctor, haven't I? But I think it is the basis for everything, isn't it? We all hear the old saying, if you haven't got your health, you haven't got anything. And actually, that can be very true sometimes for some people. So certainly that. And obviously, I'm very grateful for my loving family and my partner. I'm very, very blessed. I've got a lot of wonderful people around me that's picked me up and dusted me down in my difficult times, which I've had in the past as well. I've got plenty to be grateful for.
And if you are lucky to have someone in your life, be it your partner, your children, your friends,
best mate,
it's great.
Can't remember my name, but I won't hold that against you.
But when you've got people in your life and you're struggling with bad health, bad mental health, bad circumstances, bad luck, bad trauma, and you've got people to lean on, you are a lot braver, you're a lot stronger, I believe. I always say the best friend of any mental health or ill health is loneliness, because when you were alone, it's so frightening. And we had Luke on here from Wild and Well, and he said when outdoors, it was the first time he was out on his own in the woods, and he heard an owl, and you think, oh God, it's not an owl, it's a banshee, it's a killer, it's a murderer. And it's the same when you're waiting for your results from the doctors, or when you're pooling, you haven't got anyone just to bounce that ball off. That you catastrophise, don't you? And then we're going down that rabbit hole, and we end up in a very dark place, don't we? And I bet you see that all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not wanting to use all these old proverbs or whatever we call them, but, a problem shared, a problem halved, all of these sort of things. You're right. And often I'll say to my patients, particularly when they're discussing issues that are difficult, I'll be like, have you got somebody that you talk to, somebody you trust? And not everybody does have that. Not everybody's blessed. But if they do, I'm always like, speak with them, open up to them. It can be really useful to do that because, like you say, you carry something around in your head and it builds and builds and builds, and something, becomes a mountain, doesn't it, all of a sudden? And you become sometimes scared to tell somebody because you just feel so frightened by it. And I think, once you said it and you say it out loud, it doesn't always sound quite so bad, does it?
I think that was, we were saying off camera, and I thought it was such a great point, your bedside manner with a doctor, because sometimes it takes extreme amount of courage to go there sometimes, and then to open up about it, and then how we're met with love and knowledge can make such a difference, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as doctors, we forget day to day, you know, we see a stream of people and it can become normal to us. You know, we forget that, like you say, for somebody who's waited sometimes quite a few weeks for the appointment at the moment, you know, it could have built up. They're very nervous. They might be shy. And that little bit of time to them is vital, even if the problem may well be medically minor to me. They could have plucked up a lot of courage to discuss it. And I think, as we were saying before, you know, medicine really is as much of an art as it is a science. I think the bedside manner is really important for most patients. And some patients want a different bedside manner to others. But when you find that's somebody you can work with who you feel listens and gives you that space, then I think it can make a real difference.
Can I just add, sorry, okay, before we go, and we've got quite a few listeners, Dave. Anyone wants to ask any questions, whether it be Facebook, LinkedIn or YouTube, ask away. The harder the better, Lloyd's told me. So ask away and we'll read them out so we can answer them for you.
That's fine. We've got Google on standby. So
we can Google everything.
Yeah, what we're saying about like how it used to be, my doctor used to be Dr. Parnell, and you'd have the family doctor. And over the last, I don't even know when that changed really, but we've moved away from it. And sometimes, like you said, like Dr. Parnell was my doctor, he was my mum's doctor, my dad's doctor, my nan and granddad's doctor. So he knew the whole family, whereas sometimes, like, hopefully from month to month, or no matter when you go to the doctors, and you don't recognise that guy as much, do you find it harder do you miss those days for one? And do you find it hard, do you think that people find it harder to build rapport?
Yeah, I think it definitely is an issue. I think it's something that's probably changed quite gradually. It probably didn't happen overnight, did it? And I think part of it is because of staffing in the NHS. There are less GPs. There are less full-time GPs as well. There's been probably more of a shift from, you know, NHS England that access is king and just getting in front of a GP is the most important thing. And we've sacrificed continuity as we've done that. And you know, for me, becoming a GP, part of my motivation for that was to get to know my patients, was to get to know the people who come to see me, to know their family, their children, their sisters, whoever it is, and to develop that relationship to help me understand them. And you know, our health is deeply connected to our life, isn't it? So to have that connection, I think, makes you a better GP in the context of that patient. You can understand things. You can normally deal with things a lot quicker because you know their medical history, you know what's going on. And you can normally tell when something's wrong. You know, you can say, what's going on? You know, what's happening today? And I suppose, you know, I'm a relatively new GP. I haven't been doing it for years and years. So I've never really known the full continuity, but I've still seen a deterioration in the time I've been working.
Or even when you were a patient, because I bet you had your family doctor, you had the...
Yeah, same. Yeah, I remember as a kid going into, our doctor's surgery was in Brierley Hill. And I remember there'd be a queue with a receptionist for each doctor with the name on. That's how strict it was. You know, you went in Dr. French's queue, Dr. Samaria's queue.
That was my doctor, funny enough.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and you know that
many years ago.
And that's the way it was. You know, and whilst access is important, I do think, you know, I bang on about continuity at work, and I think some people probably roll their eyes, but oh gosh, here we go again. But I think for a lot of patients, it's nice. They feel more comfortable. It's easier. They've not got to explain themselves again. And if it's something that's difficult to talk about, once you've said it once and they know me, they know me. They haven't got to tell me all about that.
I think that with therapy as well, with sometimes it's when you disclose something, the trauma is when I lost my mum, or I was abused, or I'm an addict, or I've re-offended, and sometimes it's very difficult to keep saying that story and over. And but if you've got someone who goes, I know, you know, you haven't got to tell me every time because I've seen you for the last 2 to 20 years, and you've got that kind of relationship, haven't you? So you haven't got to relive the trauma, or you think, bloody hell, you don't even know me. And
it makes such a difference, doesn't it? I mean, you know, I don't know, think about when you ring up O2 or your electricity company, whoever, and you get through to somebody on the phone and you trot out your little story. Oh, that's such and such department, I'm going to transfer you. You trot it out again. You know, I get really frustrated in those situations. You know, I'm swearing. I'm not swearing at the person, but I'm like, you know, why I've had to explain this multiple times. And yet that's just me explaining that I've been overpaying for 6 months on a bill. You know, it's not me talking about a trauma from the past or something that's really upset me. And you know, patients are faced with having to explain it to 3, 4, 5 different doctors. And that must be really difficult. And actually, it must be quite disenchanting, isn't it? Oh, here we go again. I've got to tell them another person about this. I've still got to start again. So yeah, annoying.
And it is, and because it matters more to the person it does to the doctor, to the physician, because once again, whether it's athlete's foot, it's cancer, I remember when my wife had her daughter, the nurses, they deal with that every single day. My wife had to have an emergency cesarean because Jasmine was coming out breech, coming out bum first. And to them, it's every day we have this.
Yeah.
To me, it was my wife and my daughter, and there's the two most important things in my life. And I could be coming out with nothing. But because they're so used to it, but they forget, to that person, their life will never be the same. And that's, I imagine, when you're on the roller coaster of the job, it's hard because you can't be that, I'm not saying this wrongly, but passionate about every single person.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes you think, well, that person is going for their form of hell or paranoia or whatever it is at that time.
You are right. And I think, most doctors will admit you do sometimes have to stop and remind yourself that. And it can be hard, you've done a 10, 11-hour shift. It's maybe your fifth or sixth one of those shifts in a row, particularly if you work in hospital, you're a junior doctor or you're on the on-call rota. And yeah, it is a conveyor belt, like you say, speaking of your experience, you've already been to 6 C-sections that morning. There's already been this, that and the other. So it is easy to just get swept away and forget that actually for each person, for them, this is something they're probably going to remember for the rest of their life. Whereas you're not going to remember each individual one.
But we also forget, and this is what I've really enjoyed having you on and other doctors, it's giving a human face to the doctor, to that nurse, because we're in the blink, we're in a fight, we're panicking, my wife, my daughter might die, but you're forgetting that doctor has been on a 10-hour shift and he might or she might have lost someone in the last C-section. Their wife might be poorly at home, their kids might be playing, and we forget that person who we're panicking at is also a human being.
Yeah, I mean that is important, and I think it's good to remember that. I mean, I suppose when you're the one in that frightening situation, the calmness of your doctor or your nurse or whoever is important, and it is important when you're a doctor or a nurse or any medical profession to try and leave that stuff behind as much as you can. You're right, we are human, you can't completely shut it out, but it is important in terms of treating each patient as an individual to try and box that up to deal with at a later date in order that you can give somebody the best of you in that situation, because if you come at it flustered, it's going to make them feel more frightened and more scared. But yeah, we do sometimes have to peel off and have a cry. Things affect us the same, and sometimes it can surprise you. You can think you've become quite hardened to something, and then it happens, and you're like,
We've had a question come in. I'll just bring it up. So, Terence Burnett, do you think nurses, doctors, medical professionals have lost the person-centered approach? My God, my reading's terrible today. Do you want me to do that again?
No, I've got it. You did a good job.
Thank you. At least one of us thinks so.
It's an interesting question, really. I mean, I can see how, relating to what we've been discussing, how actually some people may come away feeling that has been lost in a pressured system where, doctors and nurses don't have time or the right amount of time to deal with the problem. They've done a long shift, notwithstanding all those other problems. They're probably not going to have their bedtime manners, probably not going to be as good. You're right. And it's funny because at medical school now, the person-centered approach is really quite key on the curriculum. There's a lot of talk about shared decision-making between the clinician and the patient and involving patients in your discussions, which I agree with. I think it's great. But actually, in reality, in a pressured healthcare system that's very much in demand, are we losing some of that because of those pressures that are there? And I think that potentially could be a cause.
I've been in and out of hospital with my daughter now for the last 8 years, various stages, pretty much every hospital in the Midlands at one point. And I have to say that I've never, ever felt that way. I've never felt like we've always had great doctors, nurses who've always come up, explained it. And I've felt like my daughter has been the centre of attention. We don't go to GPs very often, so I can't really comment on that. Care is higher than GPs, but that sounds rude to you. I don't mean it like that. But it's kind of like
It's
we don't go there.
specialised.
Yeah, that's it.
It's
So we go
specialised.
there. But I can't remember a single time where we haven't felt like that she hasn't been the centre of attention. And that doesn't mean that it's every now and again you're waiting a bit longer to see a doctor to come in and things like that. That's not, you do. Let's be honest, it's stretched. But every time they're in with us, you feel like that you're their patient and they're looking after you. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think
especially nurses.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's the same with many things, isn't it? One bad experience you can remember against 9 good ones, can't you? If a patient's had 10 interactions with a doctor and one is genuinely terrible, dismissive doctor, not interested, disinterested, bit blunt, bit dismissive of the problem, you're probably going to remember that over the other 9 that were decent experiences, and that's going to sit with you then. You think that's not right. And the same can be true of us. I could see 30 patients in a day, and 29 of them could be wonderful, and one of them could be nasty to me or rude, and that'll be the one I'll take home.
And I think sometimes it's like you're going to A&E on the Monday. Oh, I knocked my hand up on Friday night having a fight, and I've had to wait 12 hours. But when you are in an emergency, you have had a heart attack, you have had a stroke. It's amazing how fast you are seeing, and it's remembering that. You're thinking, at the moment, my hand's killing me, but am I going to die from it? Whereas that poor soul, they need the help now, and we need to remember that, don't we?
Yeah, I think that is really key, isn't it? And whilst you're in agony and your hand's awful, the rest of it, you're not immediately at risk of dying.
If it was that bad, you'd have gone on Friday night.
Well, one could argue that, I suppose. And we all put things off, don't we? Well, maybe this will get a bit better, or that and the other. So we can all fall foul of that, I suppose. But yeah, I think the NHS, despite the difficulties we've had in recent times, is still very good in the main.
Because of the caring people there.
Yeah, and I think the NHS has run on goodwill for a very long time. In fact, I think since its existence, an element of goodwill has been put in. Nurses and doctors and admin staff, everybody who works in it works over. Everywhere I've worked, when I was a junior and I was rotating through, or as a GP, our receptionists, if I get stuck behind, so do they. And they don't sit there.
And they tend to be the ones who get the...
They will carry on doing work, helping patients, finding things, sorting prescriptions out. And that happens right across the NHS. There's a huge amount of work done for free. Because if we were to work to our time and hours, we just wouldn't get the level that we get from the NHS. So I think it is important to remember that we do need to be careful of that goodwill, because if we lose it, we do lose our NHS, I think.
Well, and I'll pray that we don't lose it, because once it's gone, and we won't talk about politics, but once it has gone, it won't be coming back, will it?
It's a long road back, isn't it, for something like that? You're right. And yeah, politics aside and all the rest of it, even despite the problems we've had in the NHS recently, it is still a very efficient and good value for money system that's fair, and I really believe very deeply in the NHS and would fight for its existence. I don't think there is a better system that could replace it. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, well, I've got private healthcare, I've got that. Private healthcare in this country is cheap because the NHS exists. The premiums that we pay for private healthcare in this country are very low because those providers know there's an NHS to pick up pieces in certain circumstances. If that's gone, your premiums for private healthcare are going to be treble, sometimes quadruple the price that you're paying now. It's important to remember actually how precious the system we've got is.
So go on to a bit about Atlantic House.
First of all, for those people who don't understand what Atlantic House is, would you like to explain what it is?
Yeah, of course. So Atlantic House is it's actually a building in Lye. It is part of the drug services, and it's provided by a charity called Change Grow Live. They're a nationwide company. They've got multiple sites dealing with alcohol and drug problems. They've also got an inpatient detox unit, Park House in Birmingham, where people can be admitted for detoxification. So that's what Atlantic House is. It's been there for, I might be told off if I'm wrong, but I think it's been there since the mid-noughties at least, in different forms.
So we Google and check.
That's not that long, is it? But the amount of people, because I know a lot of people who use Atlantic House, and it's the amount of people they do work with. And it's not, it's from alcohol all the way through, isn't it?
Yeah, so essentially any issue with, a drug and alcohol, something that has become a problem for a person, we will deal with it at Atlantic House. So yeah, I mean, you say drugs, people automatically think of heroin, don't they? Often, or cocaine's another one. But people can obviously have issues with cannabis. People can have issues with prescription medications that have been legitimately prescribed by their GP. Alcohol, obviously, is a big one. Again, perfectly legal to buy if you're over 18. You know, so there is a whole spectrum of different things and a real spectrum of different people who might need to use the services.
And people think of addicts as that guy on the park bench or stealing. Addiction's got many different forms, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Addiction's really complicated, actually. There are so many facets to it. You know, addiction can be a physical problem insofar as, you know, somebody becomes tolerant to a drug, they need more of it, they become dependent because if they don't have it, they'll have a withdrawal. You know, think alcohol and seizures, or you know, heroin withdrawal. And then, you know, there's the psychological aspects. People can become psychologically addicted to a drug. So if they stop it, they don't have a classic physical withdrawal, but they can have a psychological distress reaction. Cannabis can be a quite common one there, that people experience it, but you can become psychologically addicted to, well, I suppose to pretty much anything really, but any substance. And then I suppose there's the habit side of addiction too. You know, smoking's a good example. People say, "Oh, I missed that fag at the end of my dinner," or "I missed that fag in the morning,"
or just having something in my hand.
Yeah, you know, that habit aspect to it. And then there's the social side, and alcohol's a good example of this, isn't it? You know, people might drink with certain groups of friends, people might use certain drugs with certain groups of friends, and if they've stopped because they've developed a problem and they're in that circumstance, there can be a craving because that's what they do there, that's how it would be. So, you know, I mean, that has simplified things, but I think that demonstrates the complexities of addiction, you know, in and of itself, and how many facets there are to it.
And I think when you said then addiction and habit, some people have got those habits, as you say. It's Friday night. I've got a drink because it's Friday.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Or it's 5:30. You know, going out pour a glass of wine. And it's funny though how fast habits can become addictions, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think there's a very fine line, isn't there? And I suppose sometimes we can kid ourselves that an addiction's a habit. You know, just because I've always done it, I've always had a glass of wine at 5:30, and people might notice that suddenly that becomes 5 or 4:30, or they're spending the whole day thinking, God, I really want to get to that glass of wine. And I think it is important to sort of roll back a little bit from addiction and talk about human beings. And it is natural to want to explore different things. You know, sometimes it's natural to want to explore things that alter our perception of the world, you know, whether that be alcohol, nicotine, other drugs. You know, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. And for some people, they can do that in a fairly healthy way. Some people can go and get drunk once or twice a year, have a really nice time, no problem. Some people can go and get drunk once or twice a month, and it doesn't cause them any issues, you know. So I think it is important to remember that there is sort of recreational drug use, and I'm not condoning, you know, the purchase of illegal substances and all those other things, but at the same time, you can't just put this label because somebody wants to have a line of
and you can't ignore that it's not happening either.
Yeah, exactly. It's you know, it's a thing. It happens. You know, teenagers particularly are going to explore things. They're interested. I think at the moment, vaping's the big thing, isn't it? You know, pretty pink colours and all the rest of it in the supermarkets, and it's become a trendy thing to do. So I think it's important to make that distinction between what, I don't want to term the healthy use, but sensible use of something versus something that's actually starting to get control of a person and they're becoming in need of it.
I was just thinking the other day, and it really struck home with me. It said drugs weren't the problem, or alcohol wasn't the problem. My addiction wasn't the problem. They were filling the void with what was the problem. And it wasn't until I found out what the problem was, then I could step away from the addiction. And I thought how true that was. Why we get into drugs or alcohol or womanizing or gambling or whatever it is, and you think that void was the problem. You know what I mean? And what I was filling it with was just what it was.
Yeah, completely. And I think, you know, drugs or alcohol, a lot of them do exactly what they say on the tin. alcohol, by and large, for most people, will make them feel more relaxed, more disinhibited. And it sounds quite benign, doesn't it? I'm a bit of a socially anxious person. I find it difficult talking to people. I'm 18, so I've got all those other, angsty insecurities that might come because my identity's not quite formed. And I discover that if I go in the pub and I have a couple of pints before I meet my mates, I'm relaxed. I can have a nice time. It's okay.
I can talk to that girl or boy. I can,
yeah. And it reinforces that behaviour because you do it and you're like, I had a great night. I felt relaxed. Everything was fine. I didn't have normal nerves. So you do it again the next time. And very easily that can start to escalate because suddenly it's like, I feel nervous going to work. Maybe I should have a drink. I feel nervous doing this. Maybe I should have a drink. So these things can, for some people, escalate. And you're right, Kev, for some people, it can be filling a gap, something that's happened in their past, something trauma, something to do with the way they cope with the world. You sometimes hear psychiatrists and other medical professions use the term self-medicating.
Yes.
And that's what it can be. It helps people. It's a crutch.
Sorry, Kev. Got a question before you.
Just because before I lose my tangent, because with that, it's like with and it's funny as you said, you start drinking because I'm anxious, and then I'm socially anxious, so I'll have a drink, and it's amazing how the thing you use as a crutch to get over the problem creates other problems.
Yeah,
like with marijuana. I want it because it relaxes me and I have the giggles. And the next thing you know, I've become paranoid using the same with cocaine. Oh, when it gets me out there, I'm more confident. Oh, then I'm curtain twitching.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that you use to get over the problem creates more problems.
Yeah.
And sometimes before you can come away from it, you will use that. You use that as the excuse to keep doing it. It's like an abusive relationship.
Yeah, completely. You've in your own head, you've got a legitimate reason for doing it, haven't you? Because you've got a problem, you've got something that makes you feel uncomfortable, and you found something that gets rid of that. And if you've got a headache, you take a pill to get rid of it, do you? Or most people do. You don't sit there with a crippling headache thinking I'm gonna let it go. And social anxiety can be crippling for some people, and there's something that's relatively cheap and accessible that will fix it. It's a temporary fix, but it fixes it. And people who've experienced really hard trauma may turn to other drugs to block that out. Heroin's very good at doing that. It makes people feel very nice and euphoric and wrapped up in that feeling at the moment, but it doesn't deal with the reason why they needed it in the first place. And there doesn't always have to be trauma.
No.
Some people discover something and they just like the feeling.
Like it, yeah.
And I've never met anyone who wanted to be an addict. I've met many an addict, but I've never met one saying, when I grow up, I want to rob my mum's wedding ring, or I want to burgle a house, or I want to lose my wife. But every addict I've ever known thought it won't get me. I can have a dabble, it won't get me. I've got an handle on it. And next thing you know, be it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the next thing you know, you can't keep the monkey off your back. And some people can dabble in things, being in drugs, in booze, in gambling, whatever it is. Because often when we've talked about it many times about gambling being as a dangerous addiction as substance or alcohol. Some people, as you say, if they dabble once a month, once a year, whatever, but it's when you find that habit is getting more and more and more regular, that's when you're thinking, well, is this habit now an addiction?
Just thinking about it more regular as well, aren't you? It's not just that the habit, you're doing it more. It's the first thing on your mind. It's the last thing when you get to sleep. There's, your life kind of starts revolving around getting that addiction.
And I think it's really important to remember that, isn't it? Because I suppose I can't talk about this without talking about society and how people get judged. And the medical profession are guilty of this. I've seen it happen myself. And a good example for this would be you're working in A&E as a doctor, and someone comes in because they've taken a drug overdose. Someone will have something to say about that. Oh, God, it's another one. Oh, look at this. And even though they'll still be treated, and they'll probably be treated well, they may be treated with judgment, which they may pick up on. In fact, things might even be said to that person who probably feels bad enough already that they're there and guilty enough because of all the other problems they've got. And then there's a doctor, raising an eyebrow, oh, you're here again, are you this, that, and the other. And there's this idea that it's almost their fault. Yet, in the next cubicle, there's a young girl who fell off her horse and broke her leg.
Yes.
Now, she equally engaged in a risk-taking behaviour, as did the person who took the drug.
Yes.
No one says, well, you shouldn't have got on that horse, should you? How ridiculous, riding an horse, falling off, breaking your leg. As society, we consider that to be normal and acceptable, and the other not to be. And I'm not saying that it is acceptable to go around, taking drugs and being addicted to drugs and all the other things, but
you shouldn't be judged for it.
The judgment is there, and I think that's a really big issue because it compounds people's problems. Not everybody, as we said, there's no stereotypical drug user or somebody who can become addicted to a drug. But for a lot of people who are, it's a process. You don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to try heroin, try it, and then instantly become addicted to it. It doesn't work that way. People have often had trauma, difficult experiences. That can be difficult childhood. It can be a normal life and something catastrophic happens to them. It could just be severe mental health that they just can't handle the world.
Your mates are doing it.
Yeah, or that.
Gives a blast on that.
And it builds.
Yeah.
And it builds over time. And all of a sudden, somebody's life's out of control. And most people, yes, the addiction may become the main focus. But in between times, people will have terrible guilt. And then on top of that, not only have you got to try and deal with the original trauma, you've got to deal with the trauma of being addicted and the fact that you might have lost loved ones, family, friends, committed crime, and it all becomes compounded into this real big issue. And the only people who might be able to help you, the people in hospital and things, are casting judgment, so you don't want to go. You're not, you're scared to tell anybody then.
I think that's important to remember what you said there. It doesn't matter. Addiction can hit any creed, sexuality, anyone. It can hit anyone, can't it?
Anyone.
There's no roundies. So I'll go to this question, Gav, because if not, we'll. There's another one just coming as well. I'm falling behind, so.
Sorry, I talk too much, don't I? Sorry, everyone.
No, that's what we're here for, to talk. So, Lloyd, a question about addiction. What are your thoughts on the language we use around addiction, i.e., alcoholic?
Yeah, language is important, and I'll always use the disclaimer. I can slip up sometimes and probably say words that might not be right or fit with something. I think the word alcoholic probably isn't great, is it? Because it does sort of conjure up this image in people's minds, and actually, behind somebody who's got a dependence to alcohol is a person, and we've just said that, haven't we? And I think it is always remember that. And you hear lots of phrases, don't you? Alcoholics one. Sometimes you hear talk of people being clean in the drug services, or they're clean now, implying that were they dirty before? They were still a person. They had an addiction, they had a medical problem, but they weren't dirty. I think language is important, and whilst I think whoever you are, we can all slip up with our language on any issue, it's important to be mindful and think about what it can mean. I sometimes even think about, when I'm writing my medical notes, I don't like the term smoker. I'll be like, oh, they don't smoke, or and I don't know why, because I think all of a sudden you've just reduced that person to one thing.
We say that quite often, don't we? Like, within your own personality, you're more than one thing.
Yeah.
People see someone who's disabled and think, well, he's disabled. Well, no, it's a person.
Yeah.
Look further than what you see, basically.
Absolutely. And we're all different. Some people language doesn't matter. There are people who are like, oh, I ain't bothered what I'm called, I ain't bothered what people say, and that's fine, that's good. And there are some people who are like, really don't like it at all. So I think it's a good question. I think it's important to just think about language with addiction,
and I think it's being mindful of that person, as you said. And I think language nowadays, because you see so much in the media now, and some people are picking language apart, whatever. And I think, like with everything, it's going to, if it offends I would hate to offend someone on accident. If I want to offend you, I'll offend you. But
should we do that instead?
And if I say this, I beg my pardon if I do. And I think sometimes, like we said, look, with committing suicide. You can't say committing suicide anymore. It's completing suicide, or it is suicide, and you're thinking, I didn't say it to offend you. I'm asking a question about it,
and I think there's instances where you're shutting down a conversation, which I think that's definitely with that one. So you whether you say committing or completing, just remember you're having a conversation. If you correct someone within a conversation just because of something like that, are you shutting down a conversation that could have carried on and saved a life? And that's where I think and words are important, but don't let it take out the context of what's going on.
And don't let this little slip up of a miscommunication get in the way of actually getting help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're the person who slips up, apologise and move on. We're all human. We all make mistakes, and we're going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it's fine. And like you say, it's reasonable if somebody's saying something to you and you're feeling that it's inappropriate to just say, look, I'd rather you didn't use that term. I think that's very reasonable. And suggest another one if you feel confident. Can you use this term? And I think most reasonable people will be like, yeah, sorry, of course.
Yeah, and then you probably slip up again and have to go through it again because that's the way we are. But it's and to me, it's just don't shut down a conversation because someone's used a word that you're not happy with. Like you say, just say, actually, I don't like that term. I prefer this one. Let's move it along again.
As long as we're talking, and I think if we've gone somewhere to help or to ask for help, let's remember why we're there. If we're asking for help, or if I'm trying to help, so just think, if it makes you feel better to talk like this, let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Let's play with each other instead of against each other.
Yeah, certainly. But I think I'm glad somebody's raised that because it is an important point. And I spend a lot of time sometimes thinking about, language and the words that we say and the connotations that are attached to certain words and how, it can have a really big impact on people who are already struggling and be made to feel worse. And like you say, just reduced to what their addiction is, and for some people in the throes of it, they may just feel that that's all they are. At that time, they can't see past their life and who they are. They might be a mother or a sister or, whatever they are. Those things have gone. And to have other people just then, using that term just reinforces that all I am is this, all I am is that.
You become your shame.
And that makes recovery even harder, doesn't it? Because then you've got that to deal with on top of everything else you've got to deal with.
And that's why a lot of people go back into the habit, because getting clean, believe it or not, is one of the easier parts of it. It's staying clean, isn't it? Because once you do get clean, then you've got to face up to, and then all the things you've been holding away from, the depression, the shame, the guilt, the loathing, that hits you, and then you've either got to make excuses or make changes at that point, and then that's when it's easy to fall back onto it, isn't it? Back onto your sword. Yeah,
completely. And I think it's a long battle for some people, and what we've got to remember is the reasons why a lot of people may have become addicted to something. If we manage to break the physical aspect of the addiction, like an alcohol detox, or put somebody on methadone and they don't use heroin anymore, the reasons that got them there are still there. We've got to deal with that. So that's there. And then somebody's life might be difficult. They might not have worked for several years. No career, that's gone. They've got no money. Their housing situation's bad. Those things take time to fix, and it can be really difficult. So the chance of relapse is so high because, for some people it's like, oh God, I can't deal with this, but there's something I know that's going to make me feel better, and it's going to do it pretty quickly.
And you've had all that time where you haven't necessarily had to deal with the normal stresses of life.
Yeah, you've blocked it all out, haven't you? And terrible things could have happened in the time while you were out of normal life. People could have died. You could have lost touch with people who are important to you. And I think coming back to Atlantic House, that's a real big part of Change Grow Live's ethos. It isn't just about that aspect of it. A lot of time is spent doing work around that to get people ready. If somebody's going to go in for an inpatient detox, they don't just turn up at Atlantic House on the Monday and say, oh, we'll book you in tomorrow then. Some people want that, but for exactly the reasons you say, because they can go in and they might successfully complete their 2 weeks, but there's a good chance that isn't going to then last in the future. We need to work with people to understand why they're there, get them to understand and support them to rebuild their life.
So in terms of Atlantic Out, is it a one-on-one kind of base, or is it group sessions? How do you?
So there's everything really. There's
Right.
a real sort of menu of different things that go on. So, essentially in most cases, it depends on obviously what your issue is. I mean, say, I don't know, alcohol's an issue. You'll be assessed by somebody, triaged by somebody there, ask you lots of questions. It's often very relaxed. The questions do have to be asked. It's not always easy, but we need to build up a bit of a picture. We've got specialist nurses who deal with alcohol who are brilliant. They're really good. And they'll probably ask a lot of boring sort of questionnaires to assess alcohol use, ask about medical history and things. So there will be some one-to-one work in that sense. And then we can look at, what the best approach is. Some people might not need, the classic sort of detox, if you like. Some people with a bit of a plan and support can probably do it themselves at home,
But people forget when it is very extreme alcohol misuse, it isn't just get a grip and stop it.
Yeah.
If you are drinking to excess, like a couple of bottles of spirits a day or whatever, you can't just go cold turkey because you will seizure.
Yeah, it can be really dangerous, and this is something we do see. So unfortunately, when you drink regularly and at high levels, you can develop something called a tolerance, dependence and tolerance. And when that happens, you're right, if you stop drinking, your body needs it to function, and you can go into what we call a withdrawal. Alcohol withdrawal is particularly dangerous. Not only is it very unpleasant, people vomit, they feel horrendously ill, they can have seizures or fits, which sadly can lead to people dying. So it isn't safe to just stop drinking. If you're one of those people, you do need to speak with somebody to come up with a plan. And for some people, that doesn't mean you've got to go into hospital or do this. We can sometimes work out what you're having on a daily basis and then safely reduce it. For some people, they might need a bit of extra support. We might need to give medications to support that, to help with withdrawal.
What kind of medications?
So we use medications that are from a class called benzodiazepines. Chlordiazepoxide is one that we use. Diazepam sometimes used. And these things help to protect against not just the anxiety and withdrawal symptoms, but they reduce the chance of a seizure happening. They help keep people a little bit more comfortable.
A bit more, as you said, the anxiety and because you are a changing person, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, it must be so frightening, to come to Atlantic House in the first place and not only discuss these personal matters, something that you might have been wrestling with for a long time, and not knowing what's going to happen. People might think, God, I'm going to be carted away and sent into a hospital bed for 4 weeks. But we know that for a lot of cases that isn't how we do it. So we very much will work with people for what's safe, obviously what's medically safe, but for what you want, what you think would be best for you. And whilst, we can't accommodate everything, there's a lot of work goes into getting it right for each person individually.
And it is, I mean, and obviously the other one, like with heroin, like what's it called? Coming off it. Methadone.
Yeah.
Could you explain what methadone is? Like, and why it works so well?
Yeah, so obviously heroin's what we call an opioid, and there are lots of different medications that are opioids. So codeine's a common one. You can buy low strength codeine over the counter, and when you take that, your body metabolizes it into morphine, and I think probably most people have heard of that. Heroin is quite interesting, actually. Heroin was first synthesized by the Bayer Company in the early 1920s. And at the time when they made it, they didn't think it would be addictive. So we knew that morphine was addictive. And even though it was a really great painkiller, there was a problem with people becoming addicted. So heroin was marketed as this safe alternative. And interestingly, chemists were reporting to people that lots of mums were coming in buying heroin for their baby's cough. Great cough medicine, by the way, works. But that's when they realised that it might be addictive. So heroin's sort of like a supercharged version of morphine. It's converted to morphine in the blood, but it can cross into the brain, so it does have a stronger effect. Diamorphine's its medical term, and we do sometimes use it for some medical procedures still. So when you're addicted to it, the heroin converts to morphine and it attaches to receptors in your brain and other parts of your body as well, and exerts its effect. Methadone was developed as a substitution. So methadone attaches to those same receptors, so it stops the withdrawal symptoms if you need heroin. But what methadone does is it doesn't give people the euphoria that comes from taking heroin. So traditionally, before methadone was synthesized, people who were addicted to heroin were prescribed heroin. That would be the method.
Just going lower in doses.
And it was actually called the British system, and it was very commonly done right up until the 1960s, actually. And there are still some cases where we would prescribe heroin for some people who we call a treatment resistant because methadone doesn't work. Methadone is part of what we call opioid substitution therapies. So we also use another drug called buprenorphine, or Espinol is its trade name. And we substitute the heroin with something that we prescribe to help stabilize somebody. You haven't got to buy the drug. It's free. It's safer. You know exactly what dose you're getting. You buy heroin on the street, who knows what it could be. If you're injecting, it's now something that you're going to swig and take. So again, that's safer. So you're eliminating all of those harms and substituting and preventing the withdrawal, keeping somebody comfortable.
And that's it, isn't it? And I mean, every time I said this, I think drugs obviously can be a problem for some people, but I think if we had better ways of getting safer drugs into people with better rehabs within the country and making things safer for the users and getting rid of the gangsters, and I think we'd have a better. We're never going to erode the problem altogether, but I think we'd have a better grip of actually what is going on.
Yeah, and I think that's it. We talk about this multidisciplinary approach, and that's why organisations like Change Grow Live List, what Atlantic House is about. We're not just about simply saying, right, you come in, you're on heroin, here's some methadone, go away. At some point in the past, drug treatment was a bit like that. We'll get them on methadone, that's it. But actually, we call it structured drug treatment, and we try and work to understand the reasons why people use drugs, the issues they've got. And, we've got lots of different services. We have citizens advice in there, housing in there, social services can come and help. We've got access to counselling, groups, therapies. There are umpteen different things. There's a volunteer programme that people can get involved in. And it's all about looking at, that person as a whole, that real holistic approach, and seeing beyond, as one of the listeners said, an alcoholic or whatever. That's a person's life that we've got to try and rebuild. And yes, we can't rebuild it for them, but we can support them in those different aspects. Because if we get that right, then we can wean that methadone off and there isn't any need for it.
You're giving them the best chance, aren't you, with all that support behind?
Yeah, and it still is really, really hard work. I often say to people, people who've had a difficult life or a difficult time, look, it's not your fault that happened to you. It isn't. It's sad and it's terrible. But unfortunately, it is your responsibility to fix it. No one's going to come along and do it. However, there is good support. And if you work with us, in a lot of cases, we can get things right. And everybody's recovery is different. For some people, recovery will be being completely drug-free, living a normal life and leaving it all behind them. And that's fine. And some people think that's the ideal. But for some people, they might stay on methadone for the rest of their life, but they go to work and they raise their children and they function. And to them, that could be their recovery.
And I think because you fell off the wagon doesn't mean you've got to stay off the wagon. You can relapse, you can have your wobbles, you can make mistakes. You're a human being.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, oh, well, I haven't had a cigarette in 21 days and I had one. I went, yeah, but you went 21 days without having a cigarette. Yeah. Are you going to have one tomorrow? And that's
focus on the positive instead of the negative.
You've had a wobble. Are you going to carry the wobble on tomorrow? And it's being kind to yourself, isn't it?
And that is really, really important. And I say that as well. Some patients come to see me and they're really disappointed because something's happened. There's been a slip up. And like I said before, when I see 30 patients and one patient's not very nice to me, you hang on to that, don't you? And it's the same sort of principle. You've forgotten those 21 days. It's like, oh, I did it, I had a fag, forget it now. And smoking's a great example because a few years ago, there was a really good campaign called Don't Give Up on Giving Up. And it was all around this, wasn't it? It's like, there are people who try and fail. But it really is a marathon. I know these things sound a bit cliche, but it is. And the race is only with yourself.
It is.
So it is. I think it is really important to remember if things have gone awry, it's fine. It's not a disaster. You know, we look at why they went awry and then hopefully try and avoid the circumstances that led to that.
And something else, I mean, I've found over the last, I'd say, 20 years, the boom of cocaine has just gone massive. And I'd see like people younger and younger doing it, and how cut it's become, and how once again it's become so what it's not supposed to be, and how addictive. And I'm seeing it younger and younger ages, because it used to be young kids getting a bit of resin or solids, and then it was a bit of weed, it turned to skunk. Then all of a sudden it's become the cocaine boom.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. Every toilet you go to, it seems to have really hit like a tsunami.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, I suppose we're moving back to that political arena now, really. But you know, we've got this so-called war on drugs. Drugs are illegal. All these other things, but that isn't working, is it? Because drugs are readily available. I could leave here and walk out there, and if I wanted to, it probably wouldn't take me long to get Class A drugs.
No,
you know, I don't have anybody's phone number, but by talking to people or nipping in a pub, I will be able to make the links. So it's accessible.
It would be easier to make bad links than it would be to make positive links.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, it's something that's accessible to people, and you know, people who sell drugs aren't going to have that many scruples. They're not going to care that somebody's under 18. Teenagers, as we said at the beginning, they want to explore, they want to rebel. You know, there's always pressure to do things, and there's always that cool kid, isn't there? It's like, they tried cocaine or they've got cocaine, and half the kids don't want to do it, but they're still going to do it anyway.
Or desperate, vulnerable people who will give their left leg to feel better.
And then that's it in the mix. You've got that phone in there too. So, and it's interesting because these things can become normalised in society, can't they? You know, cannabis is a good example of this. For younger generations, cannabis use is very normal to a lot of people. They don't see it as being an illegal drug, whereas older generations might be a bit like smoking cannabis, you know. But for my generation and younger generations, they're like, what does it mean? So we do get these societal shifts of what's normal, and cocaine's an example of this. It's become accessible, ubiquitous, and people are like, I don't see the harm in having a bit of that on a night out. And it's difficult to talk about it really, because obviously there's a legal aspect. You know, you're technically committing a crime by having that in your possession. That's where the criminal element exists, doesn't it, if you're carrying it? And actually, you know, possession carries up to 14 years in jail potentially,
which is bonkers.
Yeah, it's, you know, quite hard. And actual supply, and there's no legal distinction between possession and supply. That's up to the police officer to decide. Supply could carry a life sentence, you know. And
you've just officially just completely ruined someone's life.
Yeah.
Who is not a hardened criminal. They're not, you know what I mean? It's and how that life could be completely changed, even if it's doing 6 months in jail. That person, his job's ruined, his mortgage, and all these things.
And I think, I mean, Kev, obviously, you know, I'm here I represent NHS, I represent CGL in this conversation. So, you know, we might be straying into things that would be my viewpoint. So I appreciate you have to be careful. But I do think there is high time we need a national conversation on how we legislate with regards to drugs. And the only thing I'll say on that here, and again, this is a personal opinion.
Yeah, of course.
You know, if alcohol were invented today, it would probably be a Class A drug.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it would probably be like, what's this stuff people are drinking? What are they doing? This is going on. Home Office involvement, a couple of years down the line, Class A substance. And, you know, there's this distinction that exists, isn't there, between other substances and alcohol. And that's a historical one. But, you know, if we go back to Victorian Britain, opium was legal. People took coca. You know, Coca-Cola, cocaine cola, you know, it was in that drink. So I think that it is high time there was a conversation, and an honest one that's based on evidence. As doctors, we're taught to practice evidence-based medicine. We're supposed to look at the scientific evidence of the day, utilise that to formulate guidelines, and then apply that to our patients, obviously using our own clinical knowledge and everything else. And when it comes to drugs, that doesn't always happen, does it?
And we've seen the devastation, especially in the States, when we did prohibition. All it did was encourage the gangsters who were selling like moonshine. They could send you blind, but people would want the drink. And that's where the criminal element comes in. And that's what we're seeing now. Kids getting shot and stabbed and people over their bit of turf. If we take the criminality away from it and get the actual drugs safer and get the rehab safer and get the counselling safer and surely it won't erode all of the problems.
No.
But it will take away some and hopefully give people safer alternatives. And I always say, if I go into any supermarket, I'm getting some Purcell, I'm getting some hobnobs. I go, oh, heroin's on offer. Oh, I'll get some smack. Just because absinthe is on sale doesn't mean I'm going to drink it.
Yeah, I think it is important to remember that. And, you know, obviously we need to tackle the causes of why people become addiction. And a lot of those, you know, are inequalities in our society. Poverty is a big driver. You know, poverty leaves you open to all kinds of issues. Yeah. You know, if we can create a fairer society, eliminate poverty, or you know, get it down to as low as is humanly possible, which I think we could definitely do a lot better than we do, then there are going to be less risks for people becoming addicted to alcohol or other drugs. And on the same coin, the other side of the coin, looking at policy, legislation, the law, and actually having a more pragmatic approach to it. And, you know, the UK's got really good form for doing really good work in history. In the 1980s, you know, we embraced harm reduction, needle exchange. You know, it was something we went for in this country. And because of the NHS, we could roll it out really quickly. And we have one of the lowest rates of HIV in the Western world amongst our injecting drug users. And it's attributed because we accepted that people were using, and we provided needles that were clean and initiatives to reduce sharing. And at the time, there was a lot of opposition. You know, that's encouraging drug use. If you give needles, we're encouraging this. And actually, it averted a crisis.
Precisely. It's going to happen. How can we make it safer?
And I think that is
Don't throw your needles in the bushes. Bring your needles back. Dispose them properly.
And that comes back to being open and having open conversations, doesn't it? Brushing things under the carpet or hiding them away causes more problems, whether that's on a personal level with your own mental health or when we think about drug use. It happens, it's in our society. Let's drag it into the open and give some pragmatic advice to make it as safe as possible, and actually look at what is going to make this problem better in the long term. And I'm not saying I've got the answers or suggesting that, you know, we do X, Y, or Z, but I do think there needs to be more of an objective, evidence-based discussion around it than there has been so far.
And have conversations and listen to the other person, not just drugs are good, drugs are bad. It's got to be, can we see there's both sides of each argument, and how do we stop ignorance? By asking questions.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? Because, and I'm guilty of this. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not, you know, I've had debates over many political matters or this, that, and the other. And I've been guilty of being like, oh, for God's sake, that's it, you know, and all of a sudden you feel attacked, that person feels attacked. But you're right, actually, that trying to see each other and accept there's a different viewpoint and actually seeing where you can reach a consensus and a compromise. Because we don't ever get there, do we? We just all shout at each other and nothing changes.
You see it everywhere at the moment. No one, it's you're a fool, and we've seen it through the lockdown. We saw it through Brexit, and now even on panel shows, people are just shouting. They're not going. You actually make a point. I already know what I know. The only way I can learn is by listening, and by having people like yourself who can explain it, and then having someone who has been an addict, who is an addict, who's living with an addict, and we all sit around and talk. And just because it didn't work for you, it might work for him. So let's be open to options.
Yeah, completely. And that's part of, you know, what we do at Atlantic House and the ethos we use. You know, everybody is different. Everyone's going to come different, and they're going to need different sets of support. Some people really need that one-to-one work with their recovery coordinator, and that's somebody who will be assigned to you if you come to Atlantic House. And that can be a really good relationship for some people. Some people don't need that. They don't want to be harassed. They can go about their business. They can pick up their prescriptions. They can do what they need to do and get on with it. And one of the, you know, the real strengths of the service that we've got, there are a lot of people who work there who are in recovery themselves. They've been there. Not everybody. There's a nice mix. Yeah, but we've got plenty of people with lived experience. People who might not have it directly or might have it through a loved one. People who might not have it at all. They've just got experience of working there. But we've got that, and you know, we bring such a nice diverse mix to the table in terms of the staffing there. Everybody's approachable, and you know, we will work to try and tailor it as best we can. We might not always get it right, but you know, we keep chipping away.
It is really important as well, isn't it, that you do? We on this podcast, so we started out really just men's mental health, and it's kind of gone from there to talk about all kinds of topics. But originally, we still do have, but we have people who help with other people's mental health in all different ways, whether it's hypnotherapy, NLP to CBD. You know, we've had everyone, haven't we? And we've always said you've got to find your medicine, what works for you within regards to your mental health. Because what works for Kev might not work for me, or it might not work for you. But you've got to be willing to try those things.
Yeah, it's back to all the same things. There's got to be a bit of compromise. You've got to go in trying to be a little bit open. Yes, it's frightening, and we don't expect people to come in and suddenly do, you know, this, that, and the other. You know, we'll take it at people's pace. For some people coming in and discussing it, they might not want to come back for a couple of weeks. It might be enough, and that's fine. You know, we're not going to be like, right, you've got to be here tomorrow morning 9 a.m. to do X, Y, and Z, or we're kicking you out. That's it. You know, it is flexible, and we can take that approach. And like you say, things might slip up. That's fine. You can come back. We'll have another go. And there is that, as I say, the fact that we bring in lots of other services, and we'll try and connect to other people's services as well to help. Can I just ask a question back? Am I allowed to take a drink of water?
Of course you are.
I think
They haven't given me champagne, by the way. It is just water.
But I think, because I've really enjoyed it, and I'll definitely want you back on.
We've already, there's comments already asking you for to come back on, and we haven't finished this one yet, so it's gone down a treat.
We'd love to get you back on. Is there anything, before I ask you for a quote or saying, but is there anything you'd like to say? Or
I mean, obviously, you know, the usual. Thank you very much. It's been a great opportunity to come and speak with you guys, and I really like this informal, you know, this informal approach. I think, you know, to anybody who's listening who may think that they've got issues relating to addiction, whether that's alcohol, drugs, or something that's just on their mind, you know, you can give Atlantic House a call. Google Atlantic House, Change, Grow, Live. It'll come up. It's dead easy. There's a number. You can just turn up at the front door if you want. We've got a lovely receptionist called Asha who's there. She'll help you. Everybody's lovely and friendly. You can come in and there's never a commitment. You know, you don't have to worry. Just because you've come in doesn't mean we're going to suddenly strap you down and make you do X, Y, and Z. It's confidential. You can talk to us. You can take as much or as leave as little as you want. But you know, don't be fearful of doing it. If that's something you can't do and you've got a good relationship with your GP, go and see your GP. You know, it is part of our work. You can talk to us or the nurse at your practice, whoever you trust, speak up about it and say a problem shared is a problem halved. It's a bit cliche, and I said it before, but it's true.
I was just going to say, though, because we go all around the world on this, and it's finding someone to open up to, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it sometimes, and admitting it is a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we all hear that, don't we? You know, once you recognise a problem's a problem, you're halfway there. And there is a bit of truth to that sometimes. You know, I suppose admitting that there's an issue is pretty key to fixing it. But sometimes you can admit there's an issue and think, well, I don't want to fix it. Whatever that might be, whether it's that you're a messy person or you're overweight or, you know, you're using heroin and there's a problem. But trust is important, and we've all got people who we open up to better than others, haven't we? We've all been in circumstances where we've told somebody something and thought, I can't believe I opened up to you like that. But if there's somebody you trust in your life and it's on your mind, speak with them. If there isn't, which we don't always have that luxury, come to Atlantic House, have a chat. There's no commitment there.
And sometimes in your circle, people who are using the same things that you're using, sometimes they don't want you to stop using because they're rather happy with the relationship they've got with you, aren't they?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you might find that for some people it is scary. You know, you might have a really genuine friendship with somebody who's got similar issues, and yeah, they might not be ready to go into recovery or into treatment, but you are, and yeah, that might scare them. So I'm going to be on my own. So sometimes people might try and put you off. That does happen. That can be difficult, and sometimes, you know, like smoking or other drugs, it can feel like your only friend in the world. We're not about judging. We're not about telling you to stop. No one's going to wave the finger at you. We're just there to tell you what options there are there, and see if actually some of those options are acceptable to you and do you want to explore them. You know, you're always in control of the situation. And we are, you know, I don't seem too scary, hopefully. We are quite a nice bunch by and large. Yes, I rant and I rave, but I swear from time to time. But, you know, we're all human. But, yeah, please come down if there's any concerns. We'll always be happy to see you.
So, Doc, before we go, have you got any quotes or sayings that either helps you get through life or something used by your organisation?
Oh, which ones do I sometimes use? You know, our own, like, internal monologues that you sort of chat to yourself. I like to say to myself, Rome wasn't built in a day. I do say that if I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, I've got 400 emails in my inbox, everybody wants something, and I'm like, I can't do that today. Just think, well, you know, can't get it.
You can only do what you can do.
I can only do what I can do, and you know, tomorrow's another day. We'll give it another crack. That's fine.
Well, Doc, thank you ever so much for coming on.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So, guys, until we see each other next time, I want you all to take care of yourselves and each other. Ta-ra a bit.
Listen.
And that's a wrap for another show. But if there are any comments or messages that you would like us to read out for our next podcast, please be in touch. There are also lots of different organisations at the bottom of this page, and hopefully they can help you or someone you care about. Please share this to spread the word. Until we talk next time, ta-ra a bit.